Good evening. Southland's roads so far appear to have escaped any major damage in the wake of last week's snow, but with many roads still frozen, what lies beneath is not yet known. Southland District Council Communications Manager Louise Pagan says Council is currently investigating areas susceptible to damage, but does not yet know which roads are affected. It's hoped to know more by the end of the week. New Zealand Transport Agency Southland Area Manager Peter Robinson says although NZTA has not dealt with any outside of routine maintenance as yet, there's a chance of more serious damage to roads that are still frozen. He says expanding ice is a risk and could destabilise asphalt. Police still want to speak to the driver of a vehicle which hit a child outside an Invercargill school yesterday afternoon. A young boy was struck by a car outside middle school after running onto the road just after 3 p.m. The driver of the vehicle stopped and told bystanders he intended to find a park but did not return. Police say the driver has not committed an offence because he stopped to ascertain if the child was injured, but they would like to speak to him to verify witness statements. He's been described as tall Caucasian in his 30s. The vehicle was an older model silver BMW. Invercargill has breached national environmental standards for air pollution several times this winter. Air quality in the city has 7 times surpassed the allowable limit of 50 PM10 since May, with national standards allowing for only 1 breach a year. Environment Southland staff last night addressed around a dozen people at a public meeting in Glengarry talking about air quality and recently installed monitoring equipment in the suburb. The public were invited to bring their own logs of wood to have it moisture tested. Domestic fires are the biggest contributor to air quality problems in Southland. Despite legislation allowing for the establishment of charter schools having passed in Parliament earlier this month, the New Zealand Post-Primary Teachers Association says it won't give up the fight against them. President Angela Roberts says PPTA hopes the legislation will be reversed by opposition parties in the future and that sponsors should see it as a risky business. Sarah Bedford spoke to her about concerns around charter schools.
Part of the problem is there's public money and no public accountability. They will not be required to employ registered teachers and they will not be required to teach the New Zealand curriculum. They don't have accountability. They're not subject to the Official Information Act. They will be allowed to make profits and divert funding that should be going to students and the teachers in the classroom away into management, for example. This is the start of privatisation. When you see the rollout of charter schools across the world, and you've got Fortune 500 companies that run charter schools in the States, and we don't need that here. We have a sound, world-class public education system, and it doesn't need to be privatised.
Now, Hekia Parata has said that the Education Amendment Bill will mean new tools and fewer obstacles to raising educational achievement. What would your response be to that? We
think we've got plenty of tools, and if she thinks that the obstacles should be removed from schools, then why not all schools? And I'm not quite sure which obstacles she's talking about. If it's teachers' unions, that's about the only obstacle that I see her being able to remove by going to charter schools. Schools are the most amazing places for innovation in this country. We've got teachers and students who are doing really exciting, world-leading things. And actually what she should be focusing on is taking that best practice and making it socialised and making it common practice for everybody. Supporting teachers to be the best they can be and being innovative and being able to respond to their students' needs. It isn't about carving off a little bit of money for a few students in order for somebody to make a profit.
So from the PPTA perspective, your members, I guess with the first charter schools, if they come into being, will you be fighting against those still?
The schools themselves, of course we will. We will be hoping that school communities or communities where these schools are hoping to establish will fight against them, because what it means for a local community is that there are resources that should be going to the local public schools will be siphoned off to these new schools.
Do you think we could see charter schools here in Southland?
We could see them anywhere, where anyone sees a potential profit to be made. I suspect the first schools, the first 3 or 4 that Minister Banks has been referring to, will be doomed to succeed. They will be very well resourced and very well supported, and this is what's happened in other jurisdictions. And then as they roll out, we could see them anywhere.
Parking wardens in Hamilton will soon be wearing cameras on their uniforms as the City Council looks to improve staff safety. But it's an initiative that won't be rolled out in the Deep South. There are no plans to introduce such a system in Invercargill or Gore. Invercargill City Council Parking Compliance Manager Debbie McCallum says it's very rare for there to be any problems in the city where people tend to be appreciative of the work parking wardens do. Hamilton City Council Parking Activity Manager John Purcell says wardens get quite a lot of verbal abuse and there have been instances of physical abuse. He says in the United Kingdom the use of cameras has seen a 45 to 60% reduction in problems. Stay with us after the break. Why an Invercargill bank is looking more like a gym this week. Welcome back. There's been a marked increase in the number of visitors to New Zealand this May compared to the same month last year, setting a new record. In May 2013, visitor arrivals were up 9% from May 2012, according to Statistics New Zealand. With around 153,000 visitors arriving, there were 12,000 more than the last 6 May months recorded. New Zealand residents departing in May were also up 2% on last May, also a new record for a May month. For the May year, the biggest increase was in trips to the United States, helped by a more favourable currency exchange rate. A decision on the fate of Invercargill's Scottish Hall is within reach, with a long-awaited High Court hearing scheduled for September. The Invercargill City Council, which owns the Scottish Hall, has been trying to offload the building from its asset register for several years. It's been unable to do so because of interpretation of a trust deed which gifted the building to Council being unclear. Who might obtain ownership is not yet known, but the Scottish Hall Trust had in the past put up its hand to take over the property. Council Chief Executive Richard King describes the situation as a convoluted legal issue.
Well, if the High Court says yes, it's definitely a trust and you must maintain it forever, then we know where we stand. If they say it's a trust, but for example you could transfer it to another trust with similar objectives, then I think we'd probably leap at that opportunity. But if we can't absolve ourselves of responsibility, then perhaps we could then enter into a long-term arrangement with some other group that could use it for whatever purpose, provided we're satisfied that they would maintain it, because if we have to hold it forever and a day, we would still be responsible.
So this group that's been formed, the Southland Community Scottish Hall Trust, what would their mandate be if they were to get involved?
Well, basically they'd have similar objectives to what the council had. And that's a trust comprising of Scottish societies in Invercargill, and they would obviously maintain it as a memorial, as a venue for their own functions, but they would not be adverse to hiring it out for, say, a wedding, maybe birthday parties, bingo, things like that.
Is that one of the problems, is that the ICC doesn't have perhaps anybody on staff that's prepared to take control of using that facility in the likes of what you've just described?
I think the issue is, as far as the benefits of the Scottish Hall, it's probably one of the best, if not the best dance floors in the whole of Southland. However, it loses money. And that's the issue, and we have a proliferation of halls and venues around the city. We've probably got far too many. And so, a council would like to rationalise its liability somewhere, because the ratepayers always say, look, we've got to keep the rates down and we can't afford this.
St John and the Invercargill ASB Bank put on their running shoes and hit the treadmill today to raise money for St John's annual appeal. Invercargill ASB employees and St John staff took to the treadmill at 2 o'clock this afternoon for the 111-kilometre effort, the distance chosen to represent New Zealand's emergency number 111. ASB hopes to raise $10,000 by Friday. St John Area Committee Chair Reverend Richard Gray says funds raised will go towards a new service to transport patients from Invercargill to Dunedin. He says the organisation plays an important role in New Zealand.
Well, I think it's very important because it provides most of the ambulance service around the country of carting sick people to hospital and provides a lot of other services as well.
And what will the funding that is made here this week, what will it be put towards?
Probably most of it will be going to a new service that we're about to launch, a health shuttle, which will run 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, from taking people to health appointments from Invercargill to Dunedin and back again in the afternoon. So that's the local area committee of St John are having to raise the funding to for the day-to-day operations of that. Foursquare are providing us with the vehicle to run that.
And how many people would use this shuttle service, would you say, on average?
Well, we have no idea of that at the moment, but the general feedback we're getting is that people are very interested in it because, of course, people do often have trouble working out how they're going to get from here to Dunedin for hospital appointments, so that will provide a way and means of them to do that.
What's the impact that will have on the community?
Well, it will just provide them with a way of getting to health appointments and perhaps relieve friends and neighbours of having to help out in that way. It will be a service that's available to anyone, and all we'll be asking is for a donation towards the running costs from people. There won't be a set fee for it. No one would be turned away, and so I think it's going to have a huge impact for local people.
And good on them. Coming up in sport, the Steel failed to defeat the Pulse in the final round of the ANZ Championship. That's after the weather next. From your news team, good night.